Flying humanoids are strange creatures rarely seen by humans. They are often depicted as black humanoid figures that can fly without visible wings. They are seen all over the world and often by many people at the same time, but reports of them vary. On Friday, January 16th, 2004, it was very early in the morning at 3:15 when police officer Leonardo Samaniego from Guadalupe, Mexico was doing his daily vigil in his patrol car, unaware of the shocking experience that he was to undergo. A true fright he will never forget. The night was cold and dark and the streets empty when Leo noticed something very unusual. A huge black object fell from a tree next to the street, but stopped just before it hit the ground, and then slowly descended and turned towards the patrol car. At that point, Officer Samaniego knew something was wrong, so he turned on the headlights of his car to try to see what the black object was that had just fallen from the tree. Then the nightmare began. It was a woman dressed in black who fell from the tree, but she didn't touch the ground. She just floated a few meters above the ground. I could see her very well, and then she landed softly and looked at me. She tried to hide her face from the car lights. I think they bothered her. I could see her two big black eyes, completely black without eyelids, and her skin was dark brown. She was dressed in black with a cloak and a cape like a witch, and she seemed very upset by the lights. Within seconds, the scene turned into an amazing sequence of events, almost out of a horror movie, but all too real. The creature very quickly jumped onto the patrol car, trying to catch up with him, as the distraught officer tried to escape by reversing, desperately yelling on the radio for backup. As soon as I realized it was a kind of woman being or a witch, something very strange there trying to cover her face, she threw herself against my car very fast, falling on the car and hitting the windshield. She was flying very fast, and it took only a second to hit the windshield glass. I was so shocked by this action that I put the car in reverse and pushed the accelerator, trying to get away while requesting backup assistance by the radio. According to his testimony, the woman was trying to grab through the car's windshield. She was separated from the officer by only a few centimeters of the car's windshield. It was at this moment that he had his clearest view of the creature he described as a witch. The look on her face was terrible. She was furiously trying to grab me with her claws while I was trying to get away with the car in reverse, desperately calling for backup help from all the surrounding units. Finally, I reached the end of the street. I was so shocked that I covered my eyes and passed out. The extreme stress caused him to lose consciousness. A few minutes later, 2 police units as well as a nearby ambulance arrived, finding him unconscious. Fortunately, he was not injured, perhaps because he never abandoned his car during the incident. This decision may have avoided tragedy. After a few minutes, he regained consciousness and was treated by medical staff from the ambulance. A TV camera crew filmed Officer Samaniego's first interrogation just a few minutes after he felt calmed enough. Officer Samaniego strongly stood for his accounts, insisting that the creature was a witch with the ability to fly and attacked him in his patrol car. Police units conducted extensive searches of the area to try to find any traces or evidence of the mysterious creature, but found nothing. The ambulance took him to the hospital for a checkup where he remained all day. Several substances tests as well as other examinations were performed to check for the presence of toxic materials in his body, such as alcohol. All tests were negative. After numerous psychiatric tests, it was concluded that Officer Leonardo Samamigo was in good physical and mental health. The next day, the mayor said Samamigo was an excellent police officer in the department and there was no reason to think he would make up such a story. But he said that maybe because he worked too much or was stressed, he believed what he saw and not necessarily what actually happened. He said life sometimes puts people in strange situations we cannot explain. 3 other police officers on his force saw the exact same flying creature 3 days earlier. They decided not to say anything until they heard about this case. Norma Alicia Herrera said in a TV interview that she and her brother also saw the flying being during the day. She said her brother was so stunned by the scene that he became sick for nearly a week afterwards. A few days earlier, a neighbor in the area also filmed a strange flying humanoid creature and gave the video to a television station. These images were broadcast on the same day, causing even more commotion among the public. The story was also published by a major Mexican newspaper. On the same day, special surveillance units were stationed at the site of the incident and in the surrounding streets to protect locals in case of a possible attack. At the same time, an investigation was opened by the Guadalupe Police Association. Police officer Leonardo Samamigo remained isolated for treatment the next 2 days. He was interviewed again on television, confirming his story in every detail. Another bizarre story, several people saw a man flying over Chehalis, Washington on January 6, 1948. Bernice Zolkowski was one of them. She was soon joined by school children who asked to enter her garden for a better view of the aerial mystery. She estimated that the being was only 20 feet above her barn. He apparently held afloat by long silver wings attached to his body. He seemed to have some kind of control on his chest, which he used to maneuver himself with a lot of whirling noise. 8 years earlier, a striking similar case was reported in Falls City, Nebraska. On an autumn evening in 1958, John Hank saw a winged creature flying only about 15 feet above the ground, its wings like shiny aluminum and multicolored lights beneath them. The 15-foot wings were clearly attached to the man by shoulder straps. This flying man also had some kind of control panel to some remarkable invention: leathery, wrinkled skin, large, watery blue eyes, and a face that was very scary, almost demonic. The witness also testified that he was paralyzed when this man flew over. In April 1948, 2 witnesses saw up to 3 helmeted men flying around in the same manner in Longview, Washington. Witnesses saw no engines or propellers, but still thought they heard engine-like noises. A strange humanoid with large wings flew from the sky in Los Milpas, Texas. There have also been previous reports of similar creatures wearing trench coats, suggesting that they were intelligent and even had a culture similar to humans. Denise, her mother, her aunt, and 4 of her cousins were driving near Los Milpas, Texas. Her mother drove the truck, her aunt sat next to her mother, and Denise and her cousins sat in the back. Denise looked behind her as her mother yelled, "What is that?" Everyone ended up watching as the mother slowed down the car. The family soon realized that what we're seeing looked like someone with big wings struggling to fly. They panicked and screamed, likely causing the creature to hear them as it stopped and fell into the nearby forest. It was already getting dark, but there was enough daylight to see in front of them. The whole family was in shock, and Denise thought it was following them, so kept screaming. Although they couldn't see its face, they saw enough to describe it as resembling a normal human with giant wings, and the shadow resembled the monsters from Jeepers Creepers movies. This unique sighting is backed up by Denise with further assertion that one of her aunts saw something resembling this creature jump in front of her car at night on a bridge many years ago. She told U.S. Customs about the encounter, but their reaction was as if they already knew about this creature. Her aunt said the creature she saw was wearing some kind of long jacket. That means it's almost an exact replica of the Jeepers Creatures monster. Denise also said she has heard that people are seeing the winged freak all over Las Milpas and surrounding areas. The Singular Fortean Society, a website dedicated to investigating the impossible, recorded more than a dozen separate sightings of flying humanoids in Chicago in 2017. Sightings usually occurred late in the evening or at night or near a park. All the witnesses described a large bat or bird-like creature with humanoid features. A truck driver reported strange health conditions after seeing a flying humanoid flying across a freeway on March 22, 2017. My name is Billy B. I drive a semi with a large trucking company in Chicago. I observed the flying object around noon in the airspace south of Midway Airport. The object looked like a man with wings, like Batman. I thought it was some experimental drone or a secret government military test. To this day, I have 3 witnesses and a text that proves it happened. I swear it was the Mothman. The object flew over me and disappeared into the clouds. It's very loud on the freeway and I don't remember any shouting. Shortly after I saw this, I had several strange health problems that were documented. My eyes are even messed up. Hopefully I won't be considered a lunatic after this. The health problems are very strange and serious. I had several MRIs and a lumbar puncture due to pressure behind my eyes. Now these problems can be caused by another condition that has not been diagnosed. Billy B. provided documentation of the strange medical problems he suffered since his sighting, which was later traced to a rare disease in his eyes. He also provided documentation of his mother's passing, which occurred suddenly. There is no evidence that these events are related to what was seen, but it is still noteworthy. Another recently reported sighting occurred on May 30th. I was sleeping in my apartment. It was a little after 1 a.m. I had trouble sleeping that night because I took a long nap after watching an episode of Keeping Up with the Kardashians. Yesterday evening, they clarify what episode it was for some reason. This was the episode when Kourtney decided to join Kim at Kanye's fashion show at New York Fashion Week at the last minute. As Chicago got warmer, I found myself falling asleep more and more in early evenings, which negatively affected my normal sleep pattern. I hope it doesn't become a habit. Sometime after 1 in the morning, I heard a loud noise outside. Right in front of my apartment, there was a very loud and consistent noise for several minutes. It sounded like what I imagine a gunshot sounds like underwater, but louder. I looked up from my bed to check outside and saw a flash of bright white light. After researching it, I believe it was a humanoid bat that was spotted more recently in Chicago. This description does not include any flying humanoids, so it is unclear why they would otherwise associate this strange phenomenon with recent sightings of bat-like creatures. Another witness tells their story. I'm writing this out after taking a day or two to really think it out. If I wanted to report this and tell others of what I saw the other night at Oz Park here in Chicago, I finally decided that writing this out and submitting it would be therapeutic to me and might hopefully help me identify what it was I saw and maybe help someone else avoid the same thing. When the weather is nice, I usually go outdoors to the park and jog and walk my dog. The night of April 7th was no different. The cold weather had finally subdued, so I decided to give the treadmill a break and go outside to jog and let the dog get some fresh air. My dog began acting very peculiar and acted like she didn't want to go to the park. This is very strange, as usually my dog goes absolutely nuts when we go to the park and has the time of her life running and sniffing. On this particular evening, she acted like she was mortified to cross the street and enter the park. As we crossed the street and came to the area where the basketball courts are located and the start of the trail that goes around and through the park, my dog was practically being dragged as she resisted wanting to continue. After much effort, I finally got her to cooperate and begin the walk. I noticed that many of the birds you usually hear in the park were all silent, and that the only noise you could hear was the usual city noise from the surrounding neighborhood. As we rounded the sidewalk to head south, I heard what could only be described as the flapping of wings. I really didn't give it a second thought, as I assumed it would be some sort of passing Canadian geese that I've seen in the park recently. But something caught my eye, and what I saw still scares the crap out of me. I saw a large man, probably 7 feet or taller, standing on the ground. It was solid black, but what really stood out were the large, and I do mean large, pair of wings that were folded behind him. These wings stood taller than the man by at least 1.5 feet and jutted out of his back. I could not see its face as it was turned away from me and probably didn't notice me at first. It finally turned and I saw the bright ruby red eyes that appeared to glow from within. Instead of clothes, it looked like a giant half-man, half-bird kind of thing. It reminded me of the character bird person from the show Rick and Morty, but a lot scarier. This thing stared at me for about 15 seconds, which felt like an eternity, and then in a loud whoosh, it unfurled its wings and screeched really loud and jetted into the air. These wings looked almost bat-like and were at least 15 feet across from tip to tip. I felt like this thing could see right through me, read me. It knew what I was thinking, like it could stare right into my very soul. It was the most terrified I have ever been in my life. It rose into the air like a bullet, and I heard it screech once more before losing it from my view as it rose above the trees and possibly the building. It was at that time that I realized that I had yet to scream or react in any way. I was just numb from my head to my toes. I finished my walk early and went home, all while trying to see if I could see it once again once I got to the street. It was the scariest thing I have ever experienced, and it led me to look up giant mutant birds online and eventually came to similar sightings that other people have had, and eventually to where I could post and report my own sighting. I don't want you to think I'm crazy. I'm just a normal person who had a weird and strange experience. I do not take any kind of hallucinogens or anything like that. I know what I saw was real, and I saw it at Oz Park in Chicago, Illinois. I don't want publicity at all. I just want to tell my story and to warn others who might jog or walk the trails of Oz Park. I never felt like I was in any real kind of danger. I did not provoke it, but I felt like this creature could have ripped me limb from limb if I approached it or threatened it in any way. Maybe it was passing through like the Canadian geese do when they are migrating. Either way, I hope that I never get to see or meet face to face again. According to investigators, the witness is an educated professional who has lived in the neighborhood for over 10 years and after some basic questioning appeared to be a credible witness with no need to create a hoax. When asked why no photos of the creature were taken, the witness said she was frozen in place and the thought of reaching for her phone, which was in her pocket, never entered her mind. She feels that part of the fear she felt was due to some unknown influence the creature might have had over her. This case was reported by a woman who was on Lake Michigan with her husband and 2 other couples celebrating a friend's birthday. We were about 3 miles out on the lake around 10 p.m. We were having fun when I looked up and saw what looked like a giant bat. A bat as tall as my husband, 6'4" or even taller, was solid black with eyes that seemed to reflect moonlight. This bat was darker than the surrounding night sky and stood out perfectly against the moonlit sky. This bat circled the boat 3 times in complete silence. It quickly merged into the night sky and disappeared within seconds. Weather conditions mostly matched the witness's version of events. A waning moon, a cloudy sky, except that moonrise that night was around 11 p.m., so either the witness was confused about the time of the event or details regarding the moonlight's reflection were fabricated, or she mistook another light source for the moon. She added a bright blue object moving from north to south on the horizon was seen about 5 minutes after the creature took off. It wasn't a plane because it was bright green and moving slowly over the horizon. If I had to estimate, it was about 3 miles from our location. Once the object was out of sight, we sat there looking around in stunned silence. I began to feel extremely scared and told my husband that I thought it was safe to get out of the water as quickly as possible. I tried to take a picture of the thing as it circled, but all I got was black. In another report, the witness was hanging out with my boys and some friends in Chicago at the time of the sighting. As we talked about work and family, we heard a sound like a bird flapping its wings. One of my friends shouted that he saw a giant lechuza on the side of the road. We got there and saw what looked like a large owl. As we walked up, this owl stood on 2 legs and looked straight at us. We saw what looked like a giant lechuza, except it was 6 feet tall and huge. He was big, round eyes that scare everyone. We all screamed, and this thing flew into the air. This freaked us all out and scared the children. Another report reads, I arrived at work at 2 a.m. at the Chicago International Produce Market, and as I walked across the parking lot, about 5 guys were staring up at the sky. I looked up and saw the biggest freaking owl I've ever seen. I'm 6 foot, and I'm guessing this thing was at least a foot taller than me. It was completely black except for having bright yellowish reddish eyes like a cat. It stood there for a minute or 2 staring at everyone before shooting up into the sky and disappearing. It made everyone feel very uneasy and only took off after some guys threw some rocks at it like an owl, only bigger, and you could hear it flap those wings when it took off. It made the sound as it took off and flew away that sounded like a truck's brakes when they are burned out. We stood around and looked for it for a few minutes, but it never came back. I'm reporting this because there is no way this was an owl. It stood upright like a man, just really, really tall. I don't want to discuss this with anyone and would prefer to remain anonymous. I don't imagine anyone would believe me anyways. One of the guys I work with who saw this thing said it made him feel very uneasy, like a scared kid, and he was glad someone threw a rock and made it fly away. After this, reports continued to surface. I was out with my son by a spot where we had some success catching fish in the past. Takes a little effort to get to, but it has some payoffs in catching some medium-sized catfish. It was about 7:30 p.m. and we were packing up our gear when we heard something that sounded like train brakes. The problem was there was no train going by at the moment. When a train goes by, you usually feel it going by. You also hear it approaching. On this day, it was quiet with the occasional sound of trucks or cars going about. We heard the sound again and saw something fly from our left towards some trees on the other side of the river. We thought it looked like a giant bird, but it was solid black. Within a minute, we heard the sound again and saw this thing fly straight up and over the bridge and heading down the river. This thing was unlike any bird we have ever seen in our lives, and it had to be about the size of a full-grown man. It had wings that must have been 10 feet from tip to tip. It flew up and out of sight within seconds. We couldn't really get many details as this thing flew like a literal bat out of hell. And it was still on the other side of the river. We stood there and watched it fly away. I was just blown away, but then my son piped up and said he had read about some giant bat sightings that have occurred in Chicago lately. Maybe this was one of them. We packed up our gear and went and got the hell out of there as fast as we could. We didn't want this thing to come back and see us there, as we were not supposed to be there fishing in the first place. Later that night, my son showed me the websites where the reports were listed, and that led me to report this sighting. I'm sorry I couldn't give you more details on this thing, but frankly, I thank my lucky stars that we weren't close enough to see any details. There was another sighting in the area a little over a week later. I was out with my son in the park about 8 p.m. walking the trail as we have since he was about 6 years old. We were talking about what was going on within our lives and what our plans were for the upcoming summer. We were overflown by what I thought was a large goose, as we have seen multiple geese flying around the city and suburbs within the last couple of months. As we watched, it quickly became apparent that this was not a goose, but something much bigger. I can describe it as a large bat, but it had a distinct human figure, about 6 feet in height per my estimates. It was blackish in color and had an enormous pair of wings that must have been 8 to 10 feet in width. My son was in complete shock and asked me what the thing was. My response was an equally surprised, "I don't know." This bat flew up and over the field house and towards where the tennis courts would be. I heard a couple yell out in surprise as this bat flew out of view. The entire encounter lasted about 30 seconds from the initial sighting to flying out of sight. I estimated the speed of this bat to be at least 40 to 50 miles per hour, and it would be at least 15 to 20 feet above us, as it was just over top the street lights. It was dusk, but the sun had just started to set, so there was enough light to still get a good view of the object as it flew overhead. I was able to get a general description as it flew over us at speed that prohibited getting any finer details of it. We went around the field house and tried to see if we could see anything on the other side, but did not get any views of this creature. The rest of the evening went without incident, and I only decided to report this after reading some similar sightings within the city online. I was out with my daughter and mother celebrating my daughter's recent graduation, and after dinner and some light shopping, we decided to go out and check the newly opened Chicago River Walk that had just opened after construction. We walked east towards the lake, looking at the sights and enjoying the beautiful view. We heard the strange sound, and my daughter said, "Look at that." As we looked up, we saw a large winged person flying just above the water and then pulling up and going over the bridge. It looked like a huge owl or even a bat, but completely black with the exception of 2 large eyes that appeared red. I'm not sure if it was the actual color of its eyes or just the light reflecting off of them. Either way, it looked very spooky. We watched it go over the bridge and then continue flying right above the water and out of sight. It didn't seem to care if anyone else saw it. My daughter and me tried to get pictures of it, but but by the time we took pictures, all we got were blurry images of mostly black. My daughter did a sketch of what she saw. We have never seen anything like this before. It never flapped its wings while we were in sight. At first glance, it looked like a person wearing a wingsuit, but I don't think anyone would be risk-taking enough to go for a stunt like that along the waterfront. I've gone skydiving before and have seen demonstrations of wingsuits in the past. This led me to rule out that this would be a person in one of those suits or something similar, as it would be a surefire recipe for disaster. This thing also had wings that did seem a bit like wings on a bat. The back to the bottom of the wings seemed more like a membrane than feathered wings of an owl. There was no sound at all, just an audible whoosh as it flew over. It was up and over the bridge in a matter of seconds, and when it was gone, we were a bit shaken up after this thing flew away. We didn't know what it was. This sighting is still in Chicago, but much earlier in 2011. There was a giant statue of a Native American that is on the roof of a tobacco store. One time when I was a kid, I noticed 3 teenage girls standing on the sidewalk. 2 of them were pointing up at the statue, trying to show the third girl something. Then they all giggled. So I was wondering what they were pointing and laughing at. Some time went by, and then one day I went to the currency exchange nearby, now an adult. On the way, I decided to walk over by the statue to the same spot where I had seen these girls laughing and pointing to see what they thought was funny. Well, it turns out if you look at the statue from this exact spot, his thumb is sticking out and it looks like his thing is sticking out of his pants. So my wife and I decided to get a picture of this. I just got a new smartphone and I wanted to check out how good the camera would work. So I got out of the car and went to the spot and took about 4 pictures. Later on that night, I went to look at the pictures I took. In one of the pictures, I noticed an object in the sky. At first, I didn't think anything of it. I figured it was a plane or something, but just for the heck of it, I enlarged it. It looked something similar to a bird or a bat, but then again, it doesn't. So I have no idea what it could be. I was reluctant to send it in because I figured there was some explanation for what it is. But then I thought it still qualifies as a UFO because I have never seen anything like it before, and I don't know what it could be. Analysis of the photo suggests it is most likely a butterfly that flew into the frame rather than something paranormal. Things began like any normal Friday night. I and a couple of friends were going to go out and have a few drinks at a local bar. As I got to my apartment, I jumped into the shower to start to get ready while my roommate went to her room to get ready. I finished and walked out of the bathroom to my room and started to get ready to head out for the night. As I was getting dressed, I heard my roommate scream loudly. I dropped what I was doing and ran to her room to see if she was all right. I walked in to see her cowering in the corner of her room, white as a ghost and shaking. She was babbling hysterically, saying that something was looking in at her from the window. I looked towards the window and didn't see anything but the light coming in from the other apartments across the courtyard. I asked what she had seen and tried to tell her she might have been mistaken. We live on the 3rd floor of a 5-story apartment building, and there is nothing outside the window but a 30-foot drop. My roommate was hysterical and scared out her wits. I took her to the living room and sat her on the couch. I then went to my room to put on a robe or a nightshirt, since I was only in my underwear. My roommate didn't want to be left alone and actually followed me to my room and waited there as I put on a robe and joined her in the living room. After about 20 minutes of calming her down, she finally told me what she had seen in her window. She said she was getting dressed when she turned to face the mirror on her dresser. She saw a pair of bright orange eyes staring at her from the window. These eyes were attached to a creature that was staring back at her through the window. My friend lost it and started screaming hysterically and backed herself into the corner. She said she was filled with an overwhelming feeling of complete and total terror. She felt like the creature was looking at her as though she was prey. She said she felt like a rabbit and was about to be pounced upon by an eagle. I tried to rationalize with her what she had seen, telling her it might have been an optical illusion Or maybe it was the jitters from a week of hard studying. She dismissed everything, saying that she had seen what she had seen. As I sat there comforting her, my cell phone rang from the other room. I got up and ran to my room and snatched it from the top of my dresser and answered it. It was my boyfriend and one of his buddies, and they were talking a mile a minute. It sounded like they were out of breath. As I tried to get him to slow down, I walked past my roommate's open door, and to my absolute horror, I saw a pair of glowing red eyes looking through the window at me. They stared at me for about 3 to 4 seconds. Whatever it was abruptly left. Like my friend, I totally lost it and screamed at the top of my lungs and sprinted into the living room. My boyfriend was now screaming into the phone, "What's wrong? What's wrong?" Within 2 minutes, he and his best friend were pounding on the door to our apartment, followed shortly thereafter by one of our neighbors who had heard us screaming. Once we assured the neighbors that we were fine and they did not have to call the police for us, we shut the door and I immediately lost it when my boyfriend held me. We told him what my roommate had seen in the window and that whatever it was had came back again, and that's when I had seen it. And then he began to tell us that he and his buddy were on our way to our apartments to pick us up when they had seen what they described as a large bat with large glowing red eyes perched on the top of a basketball hoop in the neighborhood park. They stated that it saw them and flew into the air with an audible whoosh. He states that there were about 6 people in the park and all of them have seen it when it taken off, saying that there was no way anyone could have missed it. It was about 6 to 7 feet tall, dark gray with intensely glowing eyes. He says that they saw easily when it took off and headed away from the park due to both the lights of the city as well as the nearly full moon that night. They both lost sight of the creature after about 5 seconds. That's when he picked up the phone and called me. He says that when they heard me start screaming, they sprinted the block and a half to the apartment. Needless to say, none of us went out that night, and my boyfriend and his buddy stayed with us through the weekend. My roommate refused to go back into her room until it was well after daylight. She closed and locked the window and drew the blinds shut. She says that it's the only way she felt secure to be in there after dark. I'm still wary about coming home or going out after dark, even though I know I have to for both school and work. I hope that whatever it was sufficiently scared off by 2 intentionally screaming college students, and I hope that I never see it again. I don't think that neither I nor my roommate will ever be the same again after this. My boyfriend told me when I saw him on Tuesday that a few students around campus had been talking about a large bat that some people had seen on Friday night. A lot of people who spoke about it were spooked by it. I never figured that anything like this could be seen in a city as large as Chicago or a busy and bustling campus. It totally makes me wonder what it truly was and if it meant us any harm. Another student responds, I am currently attending university in Chicago, Illinois, and I wanted to respond to the informational flyers about recent events involving the large bat-like creatures. I was enjoying an evening with my girlfriend and taking a well-deserved break from my studies. We decided to go out and enjoy the unusually warm weather that we were having and go for a walk. As we walked towards the community park near campus, we were talking about our classes when a commotion amongst a group of people caught our attention. As we looked towards the group of about 5 people, something caught my eye and I looked up to see this thing fly overhead. It looked like a man with wings. He flew about 12 feet above us and perfectly silhouetted against the evening sky. In all honesty, it looked like an immensely oversized sugar glider, the kind I would see back home in Tasmania. Had a rough shape of a sugar glider, but its eyes were nothing like the soft eyes of a glider. They glowed red. We saw it for about 4 seconds before it disappeared from view. At first I thought it was a man in a hang glider, but it was those bloody eyes that made me think otherwise. I at first thought of ringing someone, but I didn't want them to think I had gone crazy. To say that I was gobsmacked would be a total understatement. Returning to the more recent sightings from 2017, 3 more were reported in late May, bringing the total from just that spring to 14. I would like to tell you about an incident that happened near our home in Chicago. We were returning home after going out to dinner with some friends at a neighborhood Thai restaurant. It was about 10:30 at night, and we were walking hand in hand towards home when my husband noticed something flying above, approximately 15 feet in the air, moving along at a brisk pace. It looks like a giant bat, only it was larger and solid black. The object would have been almost solid black if it were not for 2 glowing red eyes staring back at us. It flew overhead, circled, and flew over us again before heading back towards the park. It was far larger than anything I had ever seen in and around the park or lakefront. I've seen large birds in the area, but could recognize them as birds, and nothing grew even close to the size that this thing was. My husband said that whatever it was not of this world, and if it was undiscovered. But he was absolutely speechless and could not provide an explanation for what we saw. We discussed it all the way home, and afterwards I did some searching on the internet for a possible explanation when I ran across other sightings, some of them very close to our neighborhood. I showed them to my husband, who still remains skeptical, and said that we should not report what we saw, saying that no one would believe that we saw a huge man bat flying over Chicago and that people would possibly laugh at us. I reported it because I want to have an explanation for what we saw that night. Neither one of us are crazy, and we both saw exactly the same thing. My husband said he wanted to just put it behind him, and if I wanted to report it, then I was more than welcome to. So that's what I did. Perhaps somebody can provide me a logical explanation for what we saw in the night sky. At this point, I'm getting a little bored of reading these stories that are very similar, and I'm sure you are too. After reading several more encounters, none of them stick out. But with dozens of sightings of the creature reported on more than one website, there is definitely a flying humanoid in Chicago in the spring and summer of 2017, or it was a extremely long and well planned out hoax. There were also similar sightings in San Antonio, Mexico, Arizona, and Glasgow. I would love to know what other people think about this.